Martin?
Yeah, good morning. Peter Martin, Deputy Director, Water Resources for City of Santa Rosa Water Department.
Joe Scriven.
Good morning. My name is Joe Scriven from the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District. Hello.
Welcome. Fritz. You're on mute, Fritz. There you go.
Carlson, I'm a hydrogeologist, retired from CH Hill and Jacobs, not working for them now. I'm basically a volunteer member of this group.
Welcome. Greg Young.
Hi, Greg Young, Environmental Director for the Potter Valley Tribe.
Welcome. Let's see. Charlie.
Hey, good morning. Charlie Schneider with CalTrout.
Morning. Beth.
I'm the General Manager of the Mendocino County Russian River Flood Control and Water Conservation Improvement Districts.
Hey, Adrian.
Adrian Garialdi, Russian River Confluence.
Welcome. Andy John. Oh, it looks like you're on mute. Sorry, Andy, we can't hear you. We'll come back to Andy. Ed Ballman.
Yeah, Ed Ballman, Principal Engineer with Balance Hydrologics, working with Russian River Flood Control.
Welcome. Darren Moreau.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Darren Maru, and I'm the North Coast Director for California Trout up in Arcata. Thank you.
Welcome. Let's see. Dave Tabor.
Good morning. I'm Dave Tabor, Palomino Lakes Mutual Water Company, trying to represent the interests of the 65 mutual water companies in northern Sonoma County.
Welcome. Let's see. And just for folks who came on a little bit late, our apologies for the change in the link. It wasn't working, so this one works, but sorry for the inconvenience. For working group members, as we're going through, just asking folks to rename themselves and just put a WG in front of your name so I can easily see who is a working group member. So let's go to Jamie Neary.
Good morning, Jamie Neary with Russian River Keeper.
Are there any working group members who I've met? Oh, Dave Cobalt.
Yep. Good morning, this is Dave Cobalt.
And Dave, you're agricultural landowner, is that right?
Yes, ag landowner and work with a vineyard management company, and I'm on Farm Bureau Water Committee. And I've got a whiny dog in the back seat, so apologies.
Yep. Welcome. Let's see. Terry McCarty.
Terry's on. She is figuring out her headphone set right now.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to do a cross-reference with the roster. Are there any working group members who I missed?
Frank Lynch is here. Did you get that?
Oh, hi, Frank. Welcome. The Sabina's I've had is
yeah, I know that's
changed off. Who's Sabina? Okay, did I miss anybody else? Okay, and there might be others who jump on. And for members of the public, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. I'm going to walk us through the agenda here, and we can get started. So again, welcome. This is the first meeting of the Water Supply and Fisheries Work Group. This is the first working group meeting of the water forum and the planning group. So we're kind of figuring this out as we go. But want to thank you all for joining today, and thank you for signing up. This is a really, I think, an important group here to inform the process, and we're excited to get this rolling here. So for, today is kind of our first meeting. So we do want to start with a review of roles and responsibilities and kind of make sure everyone's clear on what they signed up for. And then provide a recap of some recent relevant conversations. One being the water supply and fisheries technical briefing that took place a few weeks ago on the 21st of June. And then planning group discussions where there's been some overlap to inform this group's focus. So we want to just kind of, I imagine, many folks on this call joined some or all those discussions, but we want to kind of bring everyone up to speed. And then the last thing we want to do is identify co-chairs for the working group, and we'll do that in a closed session. So just the working group members, and we'll talk a little bit about how we'll do that. That's the last thing we want to do today. Okay, let's go to the agenda. So again, we'll start with kind of membership roles and responsibilities, recap recent discussions, and just take a look at next steps, including what this group's going to focus on and kind of future meeting topics, and then get to the identification of co-chairs. And we might not need the full 2 hours. I think it depends on what the group discussion looks like, but we might not need, again, to go all the way till 11 today. And I understand there are some folks who are only able to join until about 10:30, so we might aim for that. Okay, are there any questions before we move on just the agenda and the objectives for today? Okay, Vivian.
Will the public be allowed to have a time when they can ask questions?
What's that?
Will the public have a time to ask questions?
Not today, no. That's not something that when we've talked about this, and we'll talk about this in future slides, but we've identified kind of the role of members of the public as being observers so they can receive the information. I think that's something we could talk about though in future meetings if there's an interest and folks are supportive of that. That's certainly something we can discuss. It's not in today's meeting, and we do have time for public input during the planning group meetings, but that's certainly something that we can discuss. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We have got a couple, I think, just orientation slides. So participation guidelines. So again, the discussion is going to focus on working group members, and where these are all, I think, pretty common sense, but just recognizing we've got a lot of, I think, important voices and some diverse opinions, to just request that we're all mutually respectful in those opinions and perspectives, that we kind of actively listen to each other and one person speaks at a time. So with that in mind, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand using the Zoom, and we'll have a queue here. And then for members of the public, are invited to observe. And again, that's something we could talk about future meetings if there's an interest in modifying that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I covered some of this. Please do raise your hand, mute yourself if you're not speaking. So just going to ask folks to put themselves on mute to cut down on any background noise. Please do state your name and affiliation, just so we're all kind of getting familiar with each other before you make your comment. And we'll do our best to make sure everyone can participate. The presentation we're going to go through today, meeting notes, and a recording is all going to be available of the public session items. So that's all going to be available, so you'll get these slides. Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, so the chat is open and available. Yeah, our request is, if you have a technical question around the Zoom, please use the chat, but otherwise let's just use raising our hands and track. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to walk us through the membership roles and responsibilities. A good amount of this is covered Yeah, so there's a request from Dave Tabor, and for anyone who's joined recently, if you could put a WG in front of your name if you're a working group member, so that we all know who the working group members are. Okay, great. All right, so I just want to just acknowledge that there have been some discussions around membership and participation, and so what we're walking through now is intended to reflect the input we've received from the planning group and the steering committee. That's kind of where we are today. So the working group participation is open to any planning group member, a planning group alternate, or someone who has been nominated by a planning group member to participate due to their technical expertise. So that's the working group that we have today. Some of the portions of the meetings are going to be open to the public as observers, and that's really where we want to emphasize sharing information, making sure people have access to that and can track the discussions. And some will be closed sessions. And so today, for example, when the working group is going to deliberate on who the co-chairs are going to be, that's going to be a closed session. And so as we sort of go meeting by meeting, there's going to be a kind of determination which items are appropriate for open sessions and which are more appropriate for closed sessions. The meetings could be up to monthly. They might not be monthly all the time, but just recognizing the quick timeline we're on, it could be as often as monthly. And our hope is that folks do participate regularly so you can all stay up to speed and contribute. And yes, we will identify co-leads, and we hope to do that today. Charlie, a question?
Yeah, and sorry, there's already an answer to this, but have you guys sent out a schedule of potential meeting dates moving forward, just so we can get calendar holds?
No, not for this group. We just wanted to kind of get this locked in. And I think when we talk about, kind of what's going to be the frequency of the meetings, we can then get on a regular schedule like we've done with the planning group. So we haven't done that yet.
Perfect, thanks.
Yep. Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is just a reminder of the planning group purpose. The working group is a working group to support what the planning group is focused on. So we looked at this at the most recent planning group meeting. I do think it's just helpful as a reminder. The group's purpose is to identify water supply resiliency solutions and to really look at both basins with just keeping in mind PG&E's planned decommissioning of the Potter Valley project. So that's really what the planning group has been convened to do. And this working group is really, focused on the water supply and the fisheries aspect of those water supply resiliency solutions. So let's go to the next slide. So roles and responsibilities. Some of this, I think the first 3 bullets are taken from the charter. The first is to provide local expertise and knowledge. I mean, we're really, I think we've got a lot of years and decades of experience and knowledge in this group that can help inform the process. Your role is to develop and sort of evaluate options and alternatives for consideration by the planning group, and really kind of dig into what the technical needs are, the feasibility, and benefits. And we certainly recognize there's a lot of information that's out there. So part of it will be referencing existing information and then bringing others up to speed as well. And then really providing input and feedback to the planning group on the range of solutions and what's acceptable. And the hope here is to sort of create or identify solutions that can be as broadly supported as possible and then address the needs and the interests of as many different parties as possible. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Jim to give a recap of the technical briefing and the planning group discussions.
Thanks, Ben. So I thought it would be useful to start off here today with just a quick recap of some of the key takeaways from the technical briefing that was held on June 21st and the planning group discussions. In particular, the review of the Huffman Ad Hoc Committee and two basin partnership processes that we discussed in the first planning group meeting back in May, and then the resiliency presentations and discussion that we had just last week up in Ukiah. And just as a reminder, the slides and recordings and meeting summaries for all these are posted on the website. And the material I'm just going to hit, just a few points, recognizing that there are multiple perspectives on all of these issues, and that just a few slides is not going to, certainly not going to capture a lot of the nuances of these issues. But just wanted to review a few core items that we discussed in those meetings. And thanks again to all the presenters at those meetings. So just starting with the discussion of water resiliency last week, one of the key takeaways was that water providers and water users have implemented and continue to implement many measures to reduce water demand and increase resiliency. In the near term, the loss of the Potter Valley Project diversion would result likely in curtailments and in Lake Mendocino draining in 2 of 10 years, as Don Seymour presented last week. And in the long term, as was discussed last week, for further resiliency investments could reduce or eliminate the need for the Potter Valley Project diversion. Going back to just the review of the two basin partnerships work. So as was reviewed in David Manning's slides at the technical briefing, and as we discussed at the first planning group meeting, the partnership evaluated multiple scenarios for the future of the Potter Valley Project, and their preferred alternative included the removal of Scott Dam and improved fish passage at Cape Horn. And this alternative was identified as the one that best met that partnership's shared objectives. So that group of 5 partnership members listed here on the slide. So related to that, modeling conducted as part of the Huffman Ad Hoc process, this is the material that Don Seymour presented back in the technical briefing, showed that run-of-the-river operations, that is, operating the Potter Valley Project diversion and assuming a Scott Dam is removed, could in most years, meet the water supply needs in roughly the same way that the current operations do, and that assumes that the water diversions would be in compliance with Eel River flow requirements as specified under the biological opinion for the Eel River, and it also assumes some of the operational changes at Lake Mendocino that Sonoma Water has been working on. So it includes the benefits of forecast-informed reservoir operations, as Don explained last week, and dam releases as specified under the Fish Flows Project, dam releases from Lake Mendocino under the Fish Flows Project that was described by both Don and David. So yeah, point here basically is that that Scott Dam removal would still be able to provide water supply through the diversion to meet operational needs on the Russian River side. And then last, as David presented back in June, there are 3 alternatives. So as I just said, the alternatives that the two basin partnership, the alternative that was the preferred alternative out of the two basin partnership process included Scott Dam removal and improvements to fish passage at Cape Horn Dam. And there are 3 alternatives, as David described, that are being studied further under the DWR grant funding that is the same DWR grant that initiated this Russian River water forum process. And as David described, the 3 options that are being studied further currently are the new fish ladder, so an improved fish ladder, dam removal with a pump station, and dam removal with a roughened channel. And David provided a lot of detail in his presentation on those options. And as we understand it, it will be these studies are just getting started, so there won't be further information for quite a few months coming out of that study, but it is underway. So those are just the key takeaways, and we're going to use this as just kind of the starting point for some discussion now. Any questions? Clarifications? Okay, Ben, I think we'll go back to you. It's just the map of things in case we need it for reference.
What we can do, Jim, is I'm going to pull up the timeline that we've showed everyone
Okay.
with the planning group and PG&E's decommissioning schedule, because part of it is how this group wants to move forward, how the planning group wants to move forward in a context of a rather tight timeline here. So let me share my screen. So we are, hopefully folks can see that. We're here in July at the first working group meeting. The planning group focused on water resiliency at its meeting this month. And we're gonna, we're in discussions around water supply. And then we do want to get into, moving into August of what the alternatives are. And then by November, to have some sort of initial proposal to PG&E, and our understanding is that might actually, there might be an initial communication with PG&E even before that. And so either way, that's not a lot of time. And so I think what we're trying to do is understand from this group, how, what's the work ahead of us from where we are now to where we need to get to. And how do we get there? But just, hopefully this looks familiar to folks and kind of get a sense of the time that we're working with here. Vivian, did you have a question?
On those three alternatives that are being studied by Sonoma Water, a new fish ladder is not one that we favor because we don't believe it's possible to make a fish ladder that will work there. Due to the amount of trash and the high water that comes down there that are causing the problems that PG&E is being sued over for that fish ladder right now.
Thanks for that. Okay, Jim, let's go back to slides in the next slide. And I kind of touched on this a little bit, but just emphasizing the time sensitivity of providing input. And the goal here is really to have the working group provide input to the alternatives and inform the proposal to PG&E, keeping in mind the timeline. So that's the goal here, is to get input, and something needs to be communicated to PG&E soon. I think the goal here is to make sure that it's on PG&E's radar and it allows the possibility of maintaining the diversion in the future. So those are all the slides we had today. We have some questions that I'm going to walk through, but it's sort of, we want to really kind of look to you all to help us understand how we get from where we are here to some sort of proposal to PG&E. And just as a reminder, the expectation isn't that we get full consensus here. We do want to understand from everyone's perspective, what alternatives or kind of, package of solutions best work for you, and the constituents you represent. And then I think we want to get that understanding of that baseline and see if we can do a little bit of creative problem solving to get closer to having broader support for whatever is going to be presented to PG&E. So let's go to the next slide. These are just some open-ended questions that we want the group to think about. So the first is just recognizing that there's a lot of information out there. Some have been working on this for years, others are ramping up. And so we want to be sensitive to the fact that there's a lot to digest. With that said, we are, the reality is we're trying to stay within the constraints of this schedule. So the question we have is, what information do you need, if any, before you can have an informed opinion and provide guidance around the alternatives, and what would be submitted to PG&E? And then the follow-up question we'd have to that is that information available currently, or will it be available soon? I see your hand, Frank. I'll give you 1 sec. I'm going to walk through these. So that's the first one. The second one is we just want to kind of get a temperature check of, and I think we'll kind of learn this through the discussion is, to what extent is there support for an alternative? And how can we get closer by really looking at interests and hoping we can address concerns and do some creative solution making. So that's the second. And then the third is with those topics in mind, what do we want to prioritize this group tackles, given the timeline we're under, and sort of the role here of having technical discussions and having some information roll up to the planning group for discussion. So I will stop there, and I just invite folks to you can respond to one or more of these questions, but we're just going to kind of keep this open for the group discussion. So Frank, why don't you go ahead?
One of the statements that you made earlier was that there was a conclusion that there is sufficient water without Scott Dam to provide for diversions for the Russian River side. I've never heard any answer as to what volume of water would be required to occur for diversions to happen. About 3 years ago, I think it was 2020, we had very low flows throughout the whole of the winter. I think we had a couple early rains and then little rain in the dead of winter and hardly anything in the spring. And I remember at that time I asked Sonoma Water how many days of diversion, if you will, were there during that winter season. And the answer I got from an individual was there's probably none, no days where there are sufficient high flows. You said that has been done. I've never seen any quantification of what the flows need to be to have diversions or not have diversions. So I think that is a question that needs to be asked.
So just to clarify, Frank, so and if anyone is able to respond to that question, that's great. And are you thinking, and this is question one for you, is that you would need that information?
I don't think that information has ever been provided. I've never seen it.
Okay.
I can respond to that a little bit, Ben. Don had to jump off. He'll be back at 10:15. He's best to answer that question, but in the ad hoc reports that describe the modeling of that run of the river, we call it scenario 2. Now, the criteria is that the RPA flows for the given hydrologic year are met on the Eel River side, and that we understand that thinking probably changes as everybody's thinking about the health of the Eel River evolves. What I mean to say there is that the flow criteria will likely change for what's protective of the Eel River, but given that constraint, so meeting those RPA flows, there is a hydrologic analysis in that report about how sort of durable or reliable the conditions for diversion are and how much water can be delivered to the Russian River. So that does exist in that body of work. And I think we can query Don more about that, but that was considered. So the hydrologic conditions for like 107 years is what's used to do the reservoir modeling on the Eel River and on the Russian River side. That hydrologic record considers some very, very drought intensive years. And there's, that not in all conditions, the water volume isn't equivalent, but that was certainly considered in the viability of the concept of the run of the river diversion.
Thank you, Dave. Greg, I see your hand there.
Yes, part of this overall approach, at least from what I've seen, is also increased storage on the Russian River side. And so I know that, for instance, the Potter Valley Irrigation District is looking at reservoir sites in their area for their needs. And the only thing that there's a possibility of raising the spillway at Lake Mendocino, and that also I'd like to request that I've heard others say that raising the dam, that's actually kind of misleading. It just has to raise the spillway. According to Corps of Engineers, it was originally designed for much greater height, and all it needs is raising the spillway, and then there's infrastructure around it needs to be changed. But that's really a pretty simple solution, and that doubles the size of the storage of Lake Mendocino. So that is something that really needs to, I think, always be attached to this project because of, as who was it? Well, the person before mentioned the years of low flow in the winter, which at least are fairly rare, but may increase in the future. But having multiple years storage on the Russian River side.
Thanks, Greg. Dave Tabor.
Yeah, in response to that, as I understand it, there's been the proposal for the changes to the Lake Mendocino, but that has been quote unquote in study for a couple decades, and it isn't on the agenda. So it would be great if it were on someone's agenda and in someone's budget, but it's hypothetical at this point. So we need to make sure that that's just not assumed. A question for someone who, I'm sure someone knows this, the existing fish ladder, I assume, has been there for decades and decades and decades. It's not something that's new. It may not comply with current regulations, but at some point it was functional, and the steelhead and other salmonids were successful with it. Is that a true assumption or not?
So Ben, are we listing questions, or do you want folks to have a dialogue about some of these questions?
I can answer the first question. I can real quick. I can answer the first question. The feasibility study for the raising of the spillway is in Army Corps of Engineers budget for 2024. I don't know that means that it will be funded and be done, but it is in the works.
Did that answer your question, Dave Tabor? Okay, and to answer your question, Dave Manning, I would say if folks do have questions and other members of the group can answer them, I'd encourage that discussion. I do want to make sure that we get to the questions that are in front of everyone as well. So we have time. I think we can do a little bit of both. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, Peter Martin, City of Santa Rosa Water Department. I think at the last technical briefing, we started down a path of discussing some of the potential responses for the fishery groups to some of the scenarios that had been outlined of some of the two basin partnership working efforts. Yeah, I think, just definitely for me, gaining a better understanding of, especially some of those potential, I seem to recall a slide that had this, David had presented, it's like the negative or positive consequences of these proposals going forward. For me, just continuing going down, I'd like to better understand, kind of if you start pulling strings in different ways and, restoring habitat in other areas, how that all ties in a little better.
So really digging into the potential alternatives and understanding the kind of ins and outs.
Yeah, the positive or potential negative outcomes from the different.
Okay, Vivian, I saw you had your hand up. So let's go to Vivian and then Charlie and then Frank.
Pass to Charlie.
Okay, Charlie, go ahead.
I think for question one here, costs and liabilities associated with owning, any type of diversion structure. what this group is tasked with is potentially creating a regional entity take over a portion of this project, and those costs and liabilities are going to be critically important. And I think that is a place where we lack information, or not I think through any fault of anyone's, but more analysis needs to be done on that point.
Thanks, Charlie. Frank, and then we'll go back to you, Vivian.
Just a response to the potential for raising Lake Mendocino or the spillway to Lake Mendocino. I'm not aware that that has been fully funded, and I'd ask someone who's maybe from Sonoma Water or whatever to clarify that. I know they have funded some studies, continuing studies to do that, and I know it was part of the original plan, but I don't know that there's been any actual funding to make that progress, to make that project happen.
Thanks, Frank.
And we need an update on that, yes.
So I think the best person to update the group about that is Janet Pauley, or somebody from Mendocino County Inland Water Power Commission. The Corps has conducted some feasibility studies. In the past, they were stalled. There was sort of a reconsideration of the multiple benefits of raising Coyote Valley Dam. That kept the study alive, but it lacks, and it has lacked, a commitment from a local sponsor to match the 50-50 cost share requirement for the Corps of Engineers to complete that feasibility study. There are a lot of issues associated with the raising of the dam. There are dam safety concerns, seismic safety risk concerns that are substantial barriers to constructing anything regarding the height increase of Coyote Valley Dam. So it is not a trivial matter. And it is an expensive endeavor by any assessment that I've come across or heard about from either the Corps or Mendocino IWPC. It is hundreds of millions of dollars. So it is a substantial, it would be a very substantial effort, not something easy by any measure for the Corps or a local sponsor to tackle.
If I could chime in, I've had my hand up for a minute. Just to build on what David said, it's been an IWC project for literally decades, but it hasn't been hung up for lack of a local sponsor, at least at the study level. IWPC has always met the match. It's really been very inconsistently funded and authorized at the federal level for even having any feasibility studies ongoing, not just specifically Coyote. Congressman Huffman has been very diligent and continually trying to get it in the budget, and it is in the budget at the moment, but it's not going anywhere. And then to address the man's comment about just raising the spillway, the project is actually, you have to raise the dam. The spillway is already undersized, and that is one of the limitations of operating Lake Mendocino in general. And the project involves raising the dam about 32 feet and then constructing a new spillway that is actually significantly larger than the one that is there. And it is, as Dave alluded to, it is a very complicated and expensive project. I've attended all of the dam safety rating meetings, and the seismicity is an issue everywhere in California, including Lake Mendocino. And that's actually not anything that has driven the DSAC score. The last DSAC score is mostly based on the lack of an emergency notification system, which is sort of now obsolete with the advent of reverse 911. And then the risk of downstream flooding should there be a catastrophic flood, which is also sort of ubiquitous with all dams. But overall, it met all of the issues surrounding seismicity. Its main issues currently are emergency notification and undersized spillway.
Thanks, John. Let's go to Vivian.
Yes, I wanted to take a shot at answering David Tabor's question about any assumption that the fish ladder at Cape Horn Dam worked or was effective. And National Marine Fisheries Service has determined that the adjustments that they made in the amendments made to the BIOP in the 2004 to try to protect fish were not adequate, especially concerning the fish ladder at Cape Horn Dam. And they asked for a reconsultation. And FERC went ahead and approved the license extension without reconsultation. So NIMS asked for interim measures. The summer steelhead have been listed. We have listed fishes, trying to survive at 1.5% to 2% of historic numbers in the Eel River. And the fish ladder has a number of serious problems. It has to be closed at high flows and it fills up with trash. So it doesn't work very well to get those fish above it.
Thanks, Vivian. Darren?
Yeah, I would just add on to that to say that in addition to the dysfunction of the adult fish ladder, there is no passage facility for downstream migration of juveniles, and that's a problem. They have to spill over the dam face itself, which if you've seen a picture of it, it's basically a step of concrete. And then they're met with piscivorous non-native pike minnow at the base of the dam. So I mean, the current configuration of passage doesn't function for either adults or juveniles. And so to that extent, answering question number 2 that I see here on the Zoom screen, I don't believe there is broad support for a replacement of the fish ladder as an alternative. Certainly CalTrout has voiced our opinion that we don't support that. And then going back a little bit to the objectives that were presented here that came from the Jared Huffman ad hoc committee, the 2 basin objectives were reliable water supply and improvements to fish passage. And in my opinion, the improvement to fish passage objective is outdated. At the time, we accepted that objective because it was in an era, in a context where we were trying to be cooperative within the ad hoc committee and advance the analyses that were ongoing. We didn't have information as to the feasibility of alternative water diversion structures. We now do, and we know that there are alternative water diversion structures that will work without a dam in place, that allow us to advance that objective beyond just improvements to fish migration or fish passage, excuse me. And so our perspective now is that we seek to have functional fish migration that will result in a population response. In other words, consistent, reliable passage past Cape Horn Dam so that fish can get into the watershed above reliably throughout the winter period, fall, winter, spring periods, without any constraint on that migration. And so stating the objective as improved fish passage is really uninspiring, and it's not something that we support any longer. Having said that, we do continue to support the 2 basin objective of a continued water diversion. And we now know that we have alternatives that will provide that ongoing. So thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Matt, and then Greg, and then Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Matt St. John with the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. And one is, as one of the agency, representatives on this working group, our agency, along with Department of Fish and Wildlife, most likely, and the Army Corps, would very likely have to permit, any of these dam removal and potential fish passage solutions. Certainly not weighing in at this point with regard to any preference. But as so kind of in response to question number one regarding information needs, we would need some basic level engineering designs for the different alternatives in order to evaluate potential impacts to in-stream beneficial uses and consideration of mitigations. So, frankly, I'm not really familiar yet in terms of what level of design any of the alternatives has been, what level of design has been completed. But we'll need some level in order to make an informed decision about potential impacts and then associated mitigations. And I can work with, our 401 staff to provide more specifics of what level of detail we might need.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Let's go to Greg and then Dave and then Terry.
Well, this won't help much. I just texted Janet Polly, is the study to raise Coyote Dam spillway still on for 2024? And she says, hope so, still waiting to hear from the grant funds. Didn't help that much.
Thanks for the real-time update there, Greg. Let's go to Dave.
Maybe this is a duplicate, but to me, the overriding question is to what degree is diversion possible, and what kind of production actually occurs. I did see the models, but it wasn't really clear how many years out of the typical 10 years we'd need to be under curtailment. It seemed like it was about 6 out of 10 years, but that may be a misinterpretation on my part. Certainly information about how often curtailment would happen for both the Potter Valley Irrigation District and the Russian River would be very important information.
Thanks, Dave. Terry.
I think it would be helpful to develop water budgets for both the Eel River watershed and the Russian River watershed that ties together all of the surface and groundwater water resources in a cohesive manner with the water in, water out data, because there is a lot of missing data in both watersheds about the supply and the demand.
Thanks, Terry. Good. And do you feel like, Terry, you would, is that specific to question one, if you would need to see those water budgets to have sort of an opinion about the alternatives, or that's just something that should happen in the future?
Both. I think that it's difficult to make educated decisions when you're lacking the data for supporting decisions one way or another.
Yeah. Yep, makes sense. Dave, did you have another thought, or is your hand just still up? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna try this question again. And I think that what I want to impart is that I think that the situation we want to avoid is that a proposal or a concept is taken to PG&E and we collectively don't have a sense for how much support there is among the members of the group. Call that the working group, call that the planning group. And as the facilitation team, what we're trying to understand is what's kind of like the temperature check now, and how can we get as close to a fully broadly supported proposal that would go to PG&E, and what do folks need? What do we need to get there? And so I still don't have a sense for, I have like bits and pieces, and maybe we won't get it all at this meeting. But I would love to hear folks' thoughts on how do we identify kind of benchmarking where folks are in terms of what the potential solutions are and what's going to be taken to PG&E and the extent to which, you could support that. I think that's really important for us to understand. And I would say that we've been doing at the planning group level a fair amount of sharing information and giving updates. We do need to kind of not pivot, but we need to bring that into the discussion of how do we start talking about what options or solutions folks can support, and how does that align with the interests that you've shared? We're kind of at that point. And so I can appreciate trying to understand the nuance around specific things, but we have this bigger picture discussion that we don't want to lose the thread on. So I just want to kind of put that out there, and I don't know if there's a question in there, but I do want to just share that with folks. We don't want to lose the opportunity to really understand where folks are when it comes to the different, things being considered here. So let's see, Darren, and then Terry, and then Don. I didn't know if you wanted to say something, but I saw you got off mute, but go ahead, Darren, and then Terry.
No, at risk of being a bit inflammatory, I think this dialogue represents what we've been observing for some time now, which is that the water users on the Russian River side are a fair bit behind the process that's ongoing. So in other words, you're talking about submitting some sort of proposal to PG&E that would require broad support and agreement from Russian River water users. And I respect the idea that, Sonoma Water and others have assembled this forum to address these issues. But what I'm seeing now is going back to questions that were sort of put aside a long time ago. The idea of raising Lake Mendocino was looked at the ad hoc committee, and I'm not saying it's not viable, but it's certainly not part of the current, proposal that needs to go to PG&E. It's independent of Potter Valley license conditions. And so, it seems to me like a red herring, and won't get, with that sort of on the table and in the mix of this discussion, it's going to, prevent groups that are here participating from reaching some sort of support for alternatives that could be in the very near term submitted to PG&E. I don't understand how that can happen in such a short time. And there are other factors as well, continuing to think about, creative solution. I don't know what those creative solutions are, but, many people, some of which are in this group today, have been talking about this for the last 6 years, since before PG&E's relicensing initiated, and none of those creative solutions have ever come out. And if we're still hopeful to find some creative solution that takes a path alternative to both dams being removed and Russian River users need to figure out how to get a diversion in place, I don't think it exists. And so it seems like folks aren't very caught up to the process and how fast this is moving in the current time period. Thanks.
Thanks, Darren. Let's go to Terry and then Adrian.
Okay.
I'm wondering if we could have discussions specific for what the options are, and have in-depth commentary, and so we can see, because I haven't heard from others on each options what their concerns and support are. So I'm wondering if that would be helpful, just to do it, go through what are your your options that you're putting out there, and discuss them thoroughly, and go on to the next option.
So go option by option and kind of get it.
Yeah,
at the
for
picture.
discussion. Yeah.
Okay. Adrian?
Yes, Adrian Garialdi. Yes, good comments, Darren and Terry. My suggestion was, if we have the time, could our next planning group meeting have short presentation, little 5-minute, on a variety of the options that were considered, and maybe anybody has any new options that could be put out there to get people caught up. Because yes, that's what I see, is there are people that are still way far behind. I'm really urging people to go and watch the technical presentations that are posted online and try to get caught up on this, because things are moving fast. And as far as PG&E, I think, I'm not sure that we'll have potentially a proposal, but I think in their decommissioning plan, if we can at least have them recognizing that there is ongoing work and leaving the door open to having an actual proposal as part of their plan.
Thanks, Adrian. Mike Thompson.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I'm sorry, I had to join late. I was in another meeting and I'm just trying to catch up to the discussion here. And I'm sorry, I may be retreading things that I've already said, but you know, I more would like to, I guess, echo or support what Darren is saying with regard to you know, the need to move quickly on this. And I just wanted to, if I can, get a temperature check on, Ben, when you refer to a like essentially getting a temperature check on something broadly supported to PG&E, I mean, has there been, and I'm just asking, has there been a discussion on like just the broad concept of the, you know, the fish passage, Darren, that you talked about earlier, that new goal? And so essentially looking at that new objective or a rewording of that objective with an ongoing run of the river diversion. On, I guess, in that, just on that, like really high level, getting back to the two objectives that Darren spoke about, have people weighed in on whether essentially what Darren said is something that seems acceptable? And I mean, I would say on our end, I'd say yes, it is, but I would be curious to hear what others say.
Do folks have thoughts on what Darren was?
And again, I'm referring at a high, and Darren, if you can repeat what you just said, I think you said it really well, but essentially, so support for an ongoing diversion, and I wasn't able to capture the exactly what you had said with regard to the kind of the modified fish passage objective.
Yeah. I think just to reiterate what I was trying to convey, at the time we adopted the two basin objectives, the idea of improving fish passage at Cape Horn Dam was put out. And I didn't like the way that was presented, but you know, CalTrout as an organization and other conservation organizations went along with that concept in order to help support and advance the overall work of the ad hoc committee. And so we respected the needs of the Russian River water users to assess and find ways to provide reliable water supplies on the Russian River side while addressing fisheries or riverine ecosystem objectives on the Eel River side. Those were sort of the broader concepts we were looking at when they were distilled down into a document that expressed our objectives that we all supported. The terminology of improved fish passage was fairly weakened relative to what we hoped and still hope to gain on the Eel River side. So now that we're past that ad hoc committee work, we have some good work from that group. Everything's different now. The license at the time was proposed to be amended. Now the license is expired. It's a different environment. And so what we're saying is we still support the two basin solution objective of supporting a water diversion that provides that water supply reliability. CalTrout hasn't stepped away from that objective, and most of the conservation organizations on the Eel River side have not stepped away from that objective either. We're still in support of that, but reevaluating the terminology that was used at the time, improved fish passage isn't adequate. What we want to see is reliable fish migration and riverine processes that support a healthy river in that reach of where the Potter Valley project is. And so looking at the work that Dave Manning and Sonoma Water is leading within this DWR grant relative to feasible alternatives and engineering designs for them, we've made it clear that we don't support a fish ladder replacement. We don't support continued existence of Cape Horn Dam, but we have supported the two other alternatives, the roughened fish channel and the pumped diversion, as two feasible alternatives that with more information, but at this time with what we have, meet the objectives that we're trying to achieve on the Eel River side. So that's where we are.
Perfect. Thanks, Darren. So I guess, so building off what Darren said, then I guess if I can, Ben, just, ask the question of, from with what Darren said, and Darren, Dave Manning, I'll let you chime in or correct me if I'm wrong. I would say, Darren, what you said, I would think we're on board with you on that. And I just want to, Dave Manning, just if you have any, clarifications on that. And Darren, as you know, we obviously, we still are going through, Dave's still going through the DWR grant, and we have obligations under the grant to do things. And I think you're all aware of that, but in kind of in that general support of a project that provides a water supply and reliable fish migration, I'm just trying to narrow it down to something really simple and basic, Darren, if that's okay. And
Yeah.
just kind of get a Ben, if I can maybe get a temperature check on that.
So Mike, if I can respond to that, I mean, part of the process we're engaged in with the DWR grant is to get clarity about some of the criteria that might meet Darren's definition of reliable fish migration. And there's, there's new sort of modeling and data collection efforts that will help provide hydraulic information about the various fish passage options that I think will speak to what Darren is mentioning. I think I understand Darren's concept. I think the way that meets the hydrologic conditions that are present, especially at the Cape Horn Dam site, is something we don't yet have the data for. So I think we should keep an open mind about that fish migration window and how the flows that are sort of naturally occurring unimpaired by a reservoir meet the needs and allow passage for fish sort of naturally in that reach. So that's all work that's being done currently under the DWR grant. So we will have information that emerges about that, and Darren and Charlie are very involved in that work. So I don't think we're ready to define exactly what functional fish migration is, I guess, is my answer to that.
Okay.
In my opinion. Darren probably has a different opinion,
but one question I have, and I just mindful of the time, I want to make sure we get to the co-chairs piece pretty soon. We heard a little bit about objectives that came out of the ad hoc process, the 2-basin process, and that perhaps some of those need to be updated. And I just wonder, for the focus of this group, is having an updated set of objectives, would that be useful in terms of informing, how these options or alternatives are sort of screened, or folks have, I'm just wondering if updating objectives would be helpful to sort of gather a sense of the priorities of the group. Charlie?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And I'll just add, I think for those of us that have been paying close attention to this process for a long time, there are things that are within the FERC decommissioning process, which is ultimately a process that we're all on the outside of in some ways, right? This is PG&E's project. They're decommissioning it. We're allowed to comment on it. And there are things that, within that process and outside of it. And so I think narrowing down the scope of what this group is looking at and focused on, knowing that there may be, we can try to reach consensus on some of these points, and there's other points where we may not be able to, but those are not necessarily within the scope of, the Russian River Water Forum or this working group. So narrowing down what we're actually focused on, I think, would be really beneficial. And I think that effort to define those goals and principles would be helpful in doing that.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. And just seeing a couple notes in the chat in support of having updated objectives. Let's go to Dave Tabor and then Mike. You're on mute, Dave.
Maybe this should have gone into the chat, but one of the things I'm concerned about is new objectives. We already are overloaded with objectives. And the two basin solution, if we're going to declare that as, oh, well, that's in the past, there were a lot of constituents and stakeholders that weren't part of that process, and we could really overload ourselves with new objectives. So I think we need to be mindful of that, of what's practical within the time.
Yep, good point. Thanks, Dave. Mike, let's go with Mike, and then we're gonna wrap it up after
Okay.
Mike.
And again, get back to my earlier comment. Again, at a very high level, and back to Dave Manning's good comments about, again, the details of fish passage. I guess I'm still looking for, and we're not going to get this time, but Ben, maybe next time, just get a temperature check on just the general concept of an ongoing diversion with the best, with reliable fish passage. I know I know I'm way oversimplifying it, but I think at the very basic is I guess, is there basic are there basic objections to a run of the river diversion and fish passage improvements on the heel? That's just making sure if everyone's, and maybe you don't have time to do it now, but next time, is that something that feels right? Again, a lot of details with each, but is that the right way to be going?
Okay, thanks, Mike. Frank, you're on mute, Frank.
Obviously, the constituency that I represent would be at odds with the conclusionary statements that have been made to date. And I note that within the objectives that we started off with was to improve fisheries, improve water supply, but also recreation. So the recreation in the upper Eel River is being wiped out. There's no mitigation at all. So there's not going to be consensus, at least I can't go there, because you're wiping out the recreation aspect and component.
I think Frank froze. Okay. So we've got Greg and Don, and then I do want to move on. So let's go to Greg and Don, and then I'm going to move us on.
He kind of got cut up. I'm not sure what he meant by recreation is wiped out. There's actually recreation. I've rafted down that section with the dam there, and there would be more water for rafting in the summer, theoretically, if the dam were to remain. So anyway, a little bit of an overstatement.
Okay. Okay, let's go to Don.
Yeah, I just think it's important to point out that this group and no other group is responsible or regarding, what's going to happen to Scott Dam or Cape Horn Dam. Those facilities belong to PG&E. They're part of the Potter Valley project under a license that's been surrendered. And ultimately what happens to those facilities is the surrender process that PG&E will go through with FERC. That's a very stakeholder public process, but this group does not have skin in the game on the outcome of those dams. And everybody needs to keep that really clear.
Okay. Thanks, Don. So what Jim and I will do is we're going to kind of go through the feedback that we got on these questions. We'll include it in the notes, and we'll be thinking about how to kind of batch things into some discussion at the planning group level at the next meeting and kind of roll up to that group, and then also at the next meeting, which I would recommend we do in about a month. And we haven't scheduled it yet, but that's something we can do in the short term. Matt, do you have a thought before we move on?
just Don's statement, which I guess it confused me a little bit, to be honest. And I apologize if this is not confusing to other working group members, but I thought that part of the objective was for this group identifying alternatives that would inform a proposal that would be made to PG&E. And so while this group isn't a decision-making body in terms of, nor is the planning group, in terms of what happens to PG&E's facilities, I thought this group and the planning group was going to be providing proposals that would be in informing potential decisions and future outcome of the PG&E facilities.
Does that make sense, Don, what Matt's saying?
Well, I guess that confuses me also, because for an entity to make a proposal to PG&E, they have to have the financial backing and capabilities of moving forward on that proposal. And so I don't see this group as being able to do that.
Okay, well, I think that's a topic that we can unpack a little bit more in future discussions. And I don't think we're gonna resolve it right now. Beth, do you have a quick thought before we move on?
Yeah, well, based on Don's comments, which I don't disagree with, maybe that will provide us some clarity as to why we're meeting in this group.
Right. I will give it a shot, and this is just from the perspective of the facilitator here. That my understanding is that there's an interest here, is certainly in a group of parties or a party to approach PG&E with a proposal to maintain some facilities within the Potter Valley project. And I think the hope is that that proposal will be more successful, or has a better chance of being successful, the more broad support there is for it across both basins. And so I don't think we're talking about making decisions, but I think the hope is to get input and hopefully get support for, if and when an entity approaches PG&E, that they have, solicited the input from a broad range of parties, and that's what we're doing here. So I don't know if that clarifies things, but I think that's what we're hoping to do. So I don't think we're gonna resolve it right now. And I do want to make sure we get to the next item. So let's table that for now. I'm more than happy to follow up with folks offline, and we can bring this back to the next meeting if that would be useful. So for now, I think if you could go through the next couple of slides, Jim, I think we kind of talked through the sort of next steps. The next planning group meeting is on Thursday, August 3rd. And so I think we got some helpful feedback about some of the topics related to this group's discussion we could bring to that group. And then we'll follow up in terms of scheduling the next meeting, but I would recommend this group meets again in August. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So the next topic, the identification of working group co-chairs, is going to be a closed session. So that means just working group members are going to participate in this. The outcome of this discussion will be reported out at the planning group. But for now, I'm going to request that if you're not a working group member, if you could please sign off. And I'm going to give everyone like a minute. And then after that, we're going to sign you off. This is the part of the meeting that is just for working group members. So again, if you're a member of the public, please do sign off now.